Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and I really hope this video has gone live, as it should be going live whilst I'm in France for TwitchCon, so let's hope. But there is a few things to talk about regarding Total War Warhammer after my interview with Rich Aldridge. This is why I can actually break down what he said for certain things. The main thing is talking about the Champions of Chaos format DLC, as that format itself was very good, and it's likely something that they'll use again. So in this video I want to go into a bit of a minor way of explaining how this could work for certain other factions. So, for those who might not remember Champions of Chaos, or you didn't buy Champions of Chaos, it was a DLC focused on one specific race and just kind of fleshed them out as much as possible. The Warriors of Chaos got a massive roster. Yes, there was a lot of reskin stuff, but the idea was giving the Warriors of Chaos something that they desperately needed on the tabletop, rather than just repainting something, giving them a little bit of a fresh look, and this means a lot of replayability. Champions of Chaos was actually quite good for this. Yes, a lot of animations and rigs were used, but the idea was you would have a new playstyle. You could now play Undivided properly, right? Or you could choose to play Mono-God Khorne as a Warriors of Chaos faction, or Sinesh, Tzeentch, Nurgle, or you could mix and match. You could literally play your armies like you used to on the tabletop, and again, this is something which is really cool. While I do like the Lord Pack feature, it's also important to note that it just kind of works to do a big DLC and just kind of, finish up some parts here and there. So let's look at some examples. So out of all the factions currently available in the Total War Warhammer, I'd say it's these three races. It would be the Greenskins, the Empire, and finally the Vampire Counts. Now it's very important to note a few things here. First up, not every faction, like even these, had a lot of missing miniatures. In fact, if you go on to, say, for example, any list which goes everything missing, I've done a lot of videos on that with every faction and race possible. A lot of them are almost done, but what we are missing is lore stuff, anything that's been mentioned in supplements or in various different novels, stuff that has just been hinted about in army books but never actually received rules, mostly because Games Workshop is extremely slow at that type of stuff. And then obviously we had the End Times, but these three are very strong contenders for a big DLC pack. Now, some of these factions I've already covered in their videos, so we're going to look at it fairly briefly, but I'm going to give you as much information as possible. We'll start off first with the Greenskins, because it's one that I really am passionate about. See, the Greenskins have a very big army book, and the fact is that the lore of the Greenskins mentions them to have a lot of varieties. It's not just Night Goblins, Standard Goblins, Orc Boys, and Savage Orcs within one army, but in fact you will be able to see full Night Goblin armies. This was actually something that you could see back in the day in 6th edition, or Orc-only armies, Savage Orc-only armies. That's something that I, myself, am very passionate about, because I thought that was really ridiculous as an army theme, but it would also work. There was also Forest Goblins, and Forest Goblins tend to be by themselves. You get the Spider Riders and obviously the Arachnaroks, but there were Forest Goblin Archers, Forest Goblin basic Spearmen, Poison Troops, and so on, which you've been able to see in the form of mods before. The fact is, we know that there are Forest Goblin hideouts. They worship their own god, by the way. It's a spider god, and they have their own, well, everything. Culture, religion, armies, and there's a little bit more to that. So let's talk about just splitting up the factions. So obviously Grimgor, Azag, and pretty much every other playable legendary lord for the Greenskins at the moment would remain in its undivided state. They would be able to play with every single toy. But then there could be sub-factions which add a little bit more. Now obviously this might not even be as large as the Champions of Chaos stuff, because we already have a lot of greenskin characters. But if we kick off with a Forest Goblin, you can easily put one in the Drakworld Forest, because that area is where a lot of Forest Goblins actually do live. So that gives you a unique start position, something a little bit different. Yeah, I know there's a lot of greenskins around that area. Well, because the Badlands are down there, and obviously Scarsnake and so on. But unfortunately, that's where the main concentration of orcs are. There, the Badlands, the Darklands, around that region. From there, you'd start adding in some, Forest Goblin troops, on foot, not just the ones on the mounts. So spear version with shield, sword version with shield, dual weapons, bows with poison. Well, I imagine that the normal bow version would be with poison anyway. Give them access to all the generic monsters that the greenskins have access to, such as, squigs, trolls, or the like. They'd obviously still have access to the spider riders and the arachnarok. Then also give them access to giant spiders, because that's obviously something that factions are able to recruit. If you're able to play as Striker, for example, she can recruit some monsters. It makes sense to have spiders and maybe a new spider variant that spits. It's like a kind of poison spider. And there you go. You've got a little bit of a roster there, which would be by itself not great. You'd obviously get a lot more value out of it if you played as Grom, Grimgor, Azag, and Skarsnik, but the idea is you get the benefit, extra bonuses, possibly a unique tech tree, which makes your forest goblins even stronger and your monsters stronger too. Savage Orcs, unfortunately, don't really have too much missing because, well, yeah, Savage Orcs. It's not really a full roster, but what they are missing is unit variants. Again, it's Lord and Hero options, which, by the way, I forgot to mention, but that would also be the case for, well, the Forest Goblins and pretty much every Lord and Hero version that's currently missing for the greenskins, because there's a lot. But what could be added in is the unit variants, and then obviously the Big Stabber, and a start position in, well, Lustria, I'd say. I know, Lustria Ball, but the fact is that we do know that there is a rather large concentration of Savage Orcs there. It would give the player a completely new greenskin experience, which obviously works out quite well. Wurzag would also benefit from this because new Savage Orc units, the Big Stabber could be something kind of cool. I don't care what anyone says, the Savage Orcs are the best orcs. It's always going to be my argument. I've always loved them on the tabletop. I think that's just hilariously fun, and we need to see more of that. A Night Goblin faction would admittedly get a bit more cooler units. There's the Colossal Squig, which is pretty much just a paperweight on the tabletop, but I mean, it's cool, right? Then there's the Squig Gobbler too. It's just basically a cannon, but again, well, more of a generic artillery piece, but it's still something that could essentially be in combat too. Think about it this way, it's kind of like, well, the Hell Cannon, right? So the Hell Cannon for the Chaos Dwarves does a lot of damage, but in melee it's supposed to be terrifying too. It's kind of hard to make that terrifying, but a Squig would potentially be able to move around fairly quickly if running out of ammunition and do some damage, so there you go. Add in some missing unit variants and obviously the Lord and Hero choices and you're good to go, as there's already a decent amount of Night Goblins as it stands when it comes to Total War Warhammer. Yeah, there could be more, but that would require new units being made and so on, which I think the standard already, plus just what's missing, is pretty much enough to have a proper army. I'll be very honest with you, in regards to starting position, I haven't the foggiest idea where a Night Goblin character could start, mostly because, well, yeah, everything feels a bit congested. I don't know, honestly. But then again, it doesn't really need to be a lore-friendly start. It could be literally anywhere. Hell, put it up there in Cafe. Give you a little bit of a start over there. Might be fun. But other than that, yeah, I think this would work out quite well. Okay, and I'm coming back with an edit because I did forget one big thing, the Mangler Squig. I honestly can't believe that I forgot about it, considering that there's a freaking Mangler Squig box right on my table. Yeah, so, yeah, essentially it's supposed to be kind of like a Fanatic, moves by itself and so on. Probably be different, obviously, because like no random movement when it's a unit that you can control, but this should be terrifying on the battlefield. It should do damage to you also, not only just your enemy. So if you're going to use a Mangler Squig, don't send it into a squad of enemy troops that is also being fought by your goblins, because they will die too. I'll be very honest with you, I'm very embarrassed that I forgot about the Mangler Squigs. Literally right in front of me. I feel so bad. From there, what you could do is see the addition of the Goblin Spear Chucker, because for some reason, Creative Assembly seemed to be very scared of bolt throwers for some reason. But yeah, Spear Chucker, all the missing unit variants, and there's a lot of missing unit variants. This is really important to note, because if you go on like missing list, it's like hand weapons and shields for this, or even just basic hand weapons by itself, spear variants, or just so much that is actually missing. This is the main thing. And there you go. Oh, also a generic Snotling unit. Yeah, it doesn't really have to be loads of unique stuff. It just needs to be flesh out and finish the greenskins. This is the only way I see DLC happening for the greenskins, to be honest. It doesn't need a 4th legendary lord, it just needs this. I mean, if they want to, they could add in Gorfang Rockgut, considering that he's been mentioned in the game numerous times. It would be kind of cool to get an iconic character. Have the last variants of the Black Orcs there too. Funny enough, variants don't actually exist for them. It's more of a case that they could just pick and choose their weapons in combat. This was in the tabletop, but that's a system that doesn't really exist in Total War Warhammer, so unit variants is fine. Just give all the playable toys. People will appreciate it more if they could just play with literally everything. Even if they don't use that unit in the first run, they will use it in a second, or they could do some meme lists and stuff like that. The idea is just to have a little bit of fun. And hell, if Creative Assembly really want to throw us a bone, they could do a free mini race pack in the form of the Hobgoblin Incarnate. Considering that we already have a lot of the Hobgoblins, this should have really been alongside the Chaos Dwarfs. But hey, a 1 legendary lord, some extra units, because we do know that there's variants in the game files of units that just didn't make it into the Chaos Dwarf roster. Make it a Horde faction, make it somewhat engaging, and there you go. It just needs 1 legendary lord, and this would be a standalone. Just have a Hobgoblin faction, which many people would appreciate. All they would need in terms of new units is literally just, again, Bolt Thrower, maybe a few chariots here and there, and have some fun with it. It doesn't have to be the best, it could just literally be like Bretonia, because we did have a free race before. This could be their way of doing a free mini race and be done with it. No, I'm never going to stop mentioning the Hobgoblin Incarnate, considering that they have been mentioned for Warhammer the Old World and stuff, so they clearly do still exist in the lore, and they still exist in the lore in Total War Warhammer 3. There's minor mentions to them. It would just be kind of cool. And you know, at that point, cool factor, plus the fact that things haven't really been going well for the game in certain places, let's be honest. You know, the launch was awful, everything got better obviously over time. 3.1 kind of screwed the pooch, so maybe a way to say sorry? Because not being funny, but you can say sorry all you want, but unless you actually do something to prove it, yeah. Next, we'll look towards the vampire count, something that we discussed again, but there's a lot that could be done here. You see, there's multiple bloodlines, and each of those bloodlines act fairly differently. You've got the Strigoi, you've got the Necroc, you've got the Von Carstein, you've got the Blood Dragon, and you've got the Lemians. The fact is that the culture does vary because they are very different types of vampires, and that should be explored in Total War Warhammer right now. What we have isn't really even considered a Von Carstein bloodline, but more so generic vampires, or even just a necromancer cult with vampires, because the Von Carsteins could be a little bit better too. So what we could talk about is the following. Naturally, all these vampire bloodlines are going to get their hero and lord choices. We do have a few of them already, but some extra ones wouldn't hurt. But if we look towards, say, the Strigoi, my favorite bloodline, you would get access to maybe some spitting ghouls. Kind of makes sense. It's something that we've heard about very faintly in the lore. You'd still be using like crypt horrors and stuff like that, but you wouldn't be using the generic blood knights and hex wraiths and so on, because, well, they are not really something that really joined up with the Strigoi. The Strigoi didn't use too many ghosts. What they were more is bestial. You'd get access to all the things that you have now that's already available in the game, which is pretty decent, to be honest. And then the Strigoni people. These are wanderers who used to worship the Strigoi as gods. So you would be playing as a hybrid faction, very skirmish combat based, but the idea is that the Strigoi were going to be skirmishers anyway. You'd be swarming with ghouls and crypt horrors and so on, but you'd also have access to some horse archers and some basic skirmish troopers, some archers too, just on foot. I know a lot of people aren't too keen on skirmish combat, especially when playing as a vampire count faction, but the idea is to make each of the factions very, very different. Plus, Strigoi are awesome, right? You could literally put them anywhere. Morgheim is obviously the best place to put it, because the Fortress of Vorag is currently a contested area between Imrik and Drozoath, and, I mean, it kind of fits. It's a good area to have a start position. Plus, I mean, right now it's just Malagor and Skarbrand fighting there, and it's kind of boring, and a little bit of different flavor, right? So the Blood Knights themselves would work very similar to how the vampires currently work, but you'd get access to more vampire-based infantry. This means that you'd get Blood Knights on foot, with likely great weapons, additional hand weapons, and a hand weapon and shield. It gives you very heavy infantry to play around with. Maybe even a new variant of the horse unit, because I think that was lancers. So it would be cool to see one with just like hand weapons, and obviously some lord and hero variants, because you wouldn't be using a lot of magic here. Here you'd be just trying to demolish stuff. And I know it's not a lot of units. It's not very much like, you know, the Warriors of Chaos, the Champions of Chaos stuff. The idea is very specific things. You'd get access to a lot of your current roster anyway, and then expand upon it on a overall system. Now, the Blood Dragons would start at the Blood Keep. That's in the Grey Mountains. The only problem is that the Grey Mountains already is a bit of a weird place, and to be honest, it could easily be done like you could put Abarash anywhere. The idea is obviously you want something unique, and there's already a lot of vampires, or at least a lot of vampiric presence because of Vlad, so it might not be needed. One thing is very certain, the Blood Dragons are very popular. I know that the tabletop fans absolutely adored them. Well, you'd have to if you wanted to paint those metal miniatures. They eventually became Finecast and people avoided them. But yeah, if you wanted to do those metal miniatures, if you painted them up, it's something that you put a lot of time into. It's something that you took a lot of care about. So there's an appreciation for Blood Dragons from what I've seen. Then there's the Necroc, which could literally be anywhere. These guys are the nerds of the vampires. These guys are well known to being spellcasters and so on. So yeah, I mean, there's one place that most people know, which is in Nordland, but again, anywhere around the world is possible. It's important to note here that you wouldn't see that many units coming in specifically for each faction. Here, it would be more focused around mechanics, giving each of the bloodlines unique campaigns. And there would be some other things, like for example, for the Necroc specifically, the Abyssal Terror is something that I want to see as a mount option, but it would be also very cool if the Necroc had option to have it as an unmounted version also, you know, just a unit, a big flying creature, which is terrifying, it's very ugly. It gives them something special to give them to look forward to. In terms of mechanics, I don't really want to go into some possibilities because it would take a long time. But you know these bloodlines at this point. You know that they are very varied. So giving them unique campaigns, not like the campaign of, say, the Warriors of Chaos, where everyone was going to Zanbaijin, but rather each bloodline would have their own thing, their own goals, their own unique storyline. Sure, unique units are cool and so on, but unique story would be kind of interesting, because the Zanbaijin story was good, the Chaos Dwarf story was good. I imagine that if they do it for the vampires, they'd want to try and separate it a lot. What could be done for extra units, however, is just provide a bunch of animals, undead animals. So undead spiders, undead bears would be kind of interesting. Anything that has like an animal, a basic proper animal, just undeadify it. Which kind of makes sense because, yeah, the Necroc do reanimate a lot of creatures. So, yeah, it's the whole thing about stitching them together to make Abyssal Terrors, which could be a fun mechanic. Imagine you actually pick up a bunch of undead and then fuse them together to make an Abyssal Terror. Finally, for the other bloodline that isn't represented, it's the Lemians, which obviously Neferata and so on, so we know where they'd start. You'd have to be at the Silver Pinnacle, and this is another reason why I say unique campaigns, because this is the one that needs to have a unique campaign. Even if the others don't, well, they all should, but this one needs to have something interesting. We'll get to that in a little bit. The idea here would be, okay, you'd be at the Silver Pinnacle, you'd get Neferata, you'd get the Coven Throne, but that would be available to everyone. We'll talk about that a little bit later. What would be different is you would have access to some Tomb King units, meaning that you'd have access to archers, maybe some Upshakti and so on, because it makes sense for Neferata, right? She is obviously a princess, she is Nehekaren, well, all the others are too, but she's still kept that vibe going. She'd have some unique mechanics too. A lot of the factions would have that. I mean, I've always said that South has mechanics since the whole Fates Divided DLC for Three Kingdoms came out. That's literally what I want. Literally what I want. Alright, I felt a little bit inspired, so let's go over some possible story arcs for each of the bloodlines. So, first the Blood Dragons. The Blood Dragons are trying to cure the Blood Kiss. So what you would be doing is literally taking from Imric's mechanic, hunting down dragons, killing them, and thus curing the ailments, with the end of the story being Abarash possibly fighting against Gilles Le Breton and forming some sort of agreement after the fight. You know, that's a little bit of a story arc that was mentioned in the end times, but then it was just completely ignored. It then referenced a bit, and nobody knew what they were meaning about, so this could be a way to actually expand on that a little bit. Yes, I know that goes into end time storyline and so on, but I don't know, man. I just feel like it would be nice to know what that story was actually going to be at this point. More curiosity than anything else. The Strigoi could have the whole reforming of Morgheim. You know, they had their own empire at one point, so you'd have to go all the way from Morgheim to the fortress of Vorag, but what could be done in the story is that the other vampires are just screwing with you, because, well, the Lemians would absolutely want to stop you from gaining more power, but the other ones could notice you and think, this could be a problem, so they could literally send forces as you expand your influence further and further, in a very similar sense to how the Wood Elves have it, right? As you build up the Oak of Ages, the Beastmen would actually send more stacks against you. Obviously, you had those little moments where big forces eventually culminating in Morgr the Shadowgave coming for you. So this would be fairly similar to that. It could easily be tied to the main city of Morgheim. So you'd be taking ancestral lands that would give you more growth, and that means that you'd be able to upgrade it, with certain points being leading up to invasions from other undead factions trying to slow you down. With the Necroc, you could be trying to stitch together the ultimate monstrosity. You'd be tasked to hunting down creatures all across the Warhammer world, very similar to that of the Norska hunts, and getting pieces together to create something fairly unique as, well, you know, something unique to the Necroc would be kind of interesting as a final quest battle type of thing. Because we know that, for example, when you play a campaign that has a final battle, you can actually get to a final battle fairly early on, so this could give you something to then use in your actual proper campaign as you start pushing out. And then, well, you know, the Lemians. The Lemians could have a very simple quest of just going back to Lemia. Obviously, there would be roadblocks in the way and so on, and you'd have to fight against Khalida, which it would be really cool if they brought Khalida back, you know, the voice actress, to do some dialogue, have a really interesting type of quest. It's something that I really, really want. I want to see Khalida and Neferata fight. Believe me, it's something that just needs to happen. So I think something like this, you know, 4 completely different stories would work really, really well. Add in some new units, obviously stuff like the Coven Throne, which is historically something a lot of people really, really want. The Abyssal Terror, obviously, as a mount. Spear Hosts are a massively requested thing, and I want them very much so, because I've been painting up a bunch of them, actually, so I've got them in my mind. I don't know if bat swarms are needed, because really it's just like a swarm unit, and we already have bat swarms anyway, but like these were smaller, you know, and swarms don't really work, barring Nurglings, but they work as their own entities. There is obviously some older stuff, like for example, well, Spectral Huntsmen, Spectral Hounds, and so on, but I feel like just with the unique stuff that some of the guys are getting already, it doesn't really need to be too many units. It could just be focused around literally making a fun campaign for all the characters, maybe sprinkle in a few legendary heroes here and there, because Conrad von Karstein is a legendary hero that needs to happen at some point, and there you go. Really, that's simple enough. Now we'd have to come to the FLC, and I think that there should be 2 here. Yeah, I know we're asking for a lot, but the fact is, look, I don't like the FLC legendary hero aspect. It's something that Ulrika is cool and all that, but I don't know, man. Especially for big DLCs like this, there needs to be something else. And I could see Vlad and the Red Duke. So when it comes to Vlad, it's very simple. Turn him into an Empire faction. Give him the Elector Count mechanics, give him access to a bunch more human units, the same as the Empire, provided that you own the specific DLCs and so on, and that way you can make an unholy empire. You can relive the Vampire Wars. Something like that is really, really cool, and I think it should be there for just Vlad and Isabella. You wouldn't be able to do that with Manfred. Manfred and Gorst and Kemla at this point would be considered as the vanilla factions unless something unique happens to them. But yeah, Vlad needs to have this. It's just so important in their lore, and it's almost there, you know, you've got the whole, you can get Sylvanian crossbows and handgunners, but I want a full hybrid of Empire and Vampire counts, because it would just be amazing, right? And then the Red Duke, simple, just pretty much what everyone expected from the Red Duke to begin with. A hybrid between Bretonnia and the Vampire counts. We've had mods like that, don't get me wrong, but the fact is, that's what we all want officially too. It's something that a lot of people have been doing on the tabletop since pretty much, yeah, Musalon was a thing. Obviously, keep in mind that the Red Duke actually wasn't even from Musalon. That's supposed to be Malobord. I don't think we're going to get Malobord because that would be 2 end times, like way too much. I think something like that would be really, really cool, and it will give you a good reason because he's El Sith, right? Like, he needs a unique campaign. It would just be kind of interesting to see that happen just to allow for, you know, uniqueness. Sure, it's close to the other vampire characters where I'm hypothetically putting them, but still, this would be kind of fun. Then lastly, the Empire. Now, the Empire is quite a varied country. There's so many things about it. So I could imagine that the DLC could focus on legendary characters being implemented, but the units would focus around faith with the churches, steel with obviously the knightly orders, and not gunpowder, no, magic, because there's a lot of magic that's missing still from the Empire. You'd be wondering about gunpowder, but I imagine that the Thrones of Decay DLC, the one that's coming after the Shadows of Change, is probably going to deal with the gunpowder stuff. So yeah, it would be kind of different. You see, when it comes to faith, we know there's a bunch of churches, which would be, you know, the Church of Sigmar, the Church of Tal, the Church of Mor, all these different churches, which in theory could be represented in one way, shape, or form. Different types of warrior priests, different types of units that could be inspired by that stuff that we'll likely see in the old world. Now, very important to note here that obviously he said that they're firmly rooted in Warhammer Fantasy, but the interview kind of brushed aside Old World when I kept asking it, and I think that that's really important to note, because Cathay and Kislev are from the Old World, not Warhammer Fantasy. Plus, it would make the Empire feel more like the Empire, because one thing that really does annoy me about Warhammer Total War is the Empire screaming for Sigmar, for Sigmar, for Sigmar. It's like, not every Imperial is a Sigmarite. They are actually very devoted to other gods. That's why their pantheon is so large. So it would be nice to see more representation of that. When it comes to steel, focus around the knightly orders. Think about it this way. You get a Grand Master. This is a Lord choice. And you would have a very similar mechanic to the Warriors of Chaos, where at a certain level you'll be able to upgrade him to one of another chapter, essentially. Rather than being a generic Grandmaster, you can make him Knights Panther, Reichsguard, Knight of Ulrich, whatever, right? The idea is to have variety. And this could also work with your basic knights, where the Chaos Warrior Warband system would be used once again, but kind of differently. Rather than using it for your whole roster, you would only use it with one specific unit. You'd get your Empire Knights, and then you'd be able to upgrade them as you get to certain ranks. So you could turn them into Knights Panther, again, Reichsguards, you could turn them into Knights of the Blazing Sun. Just add in as many of them as possible. Hell, even some new ones. We are expecting, like, Knights of Ulrich riding on giant wolves. That's something that's been mentioned in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay very recently. It's something that we could expect with the return of Warhammer Fantasy with Warhammer the Old World. So have some fun. Some knights riding stags, all the different stuff. There is so many knightly orders. Like, it would be a lot of units, but then again, this would be a Champions of Chaos style DLC, so it would allow you to have just different things. Perhaps add a little bit more to it, where, depending on the region that you've conquered, you might have access to them if you build a prerequisite building. So if you're playing as Karl Franz, for example, you'd have to go to Middenheim to be able to pick up the Knights of Ulrich, to be able to get the Wolf Riders. If you go down to Talia, you'd be able to go and pick up the Knights in Carmine, which are knights which have dual weapons. They actually fight with additional hand weapons whilst also on horse. It's a travesty that we haven't seen a lot of representation to the knightly orders, considering how popular they are, and it's something that, yeah, it would be kind of cool to see a DLC kind of focus on, mostly because all the other attention, all the other budget would literally go to characters, right? We'll talk about the characters a little bit later, don't you worry. I don't know, I just kind of want this. When it comes to magic, well, you know, we're missing a bunch of Lord options with all the magic users from the Colleges of Magic. We're also still missing the Gold Wizard, goddamn. We've actually seen their concept art, which is amazing. You know, prior to the launch of Warhammer 3, there was concept art in their art book, and still nothing. Still nothing. So maybe one day, it would be kind of cool to see the Colleges of Magic have its own unique mechanics. I would say have all the hero options and upgrade them to Lords. Kinda how Ascension works, but also mixed up with the whole Hogwarts style that Kislev has. I kind of like the idea of you level up a hero, you send them to your magical school, and you can even get them some special types of, you know, traits and so on, unique traits. However, you can just upgrade them normally up to, say, rank 15 from your hero, and then you can choose to turn them into a lord, so the hero disappears and goes into your lord pool. Something kind of interesting like that. Just unique, but still taking from stuff that we already know. Main thing is, look, I like using wizards as lords too. I don't really go for the generic lord, melee lords and so on, unless I need a cheaper army. It could be kind of interesting. Again, it's kind of annoying that the Empire doesn't have a true representation of the Colleges of Magic, considering how important that is in Warhammer Fantasy. So yeah, that could kind of work, right? When it comes to unique units, really, other than just the Wizard Lords and so on, it would just be the Celestial Hurricanum. If they go Faith style, they could also add in the Tutogen Guard and pretty much everything that's missing from an Ulrich-themed DLC, you know, basically the Storm of Chaos list. But yeah, there's not really much other stuff, which is kind of interesting when you look at it, right? The Empire is kind of almost done. Sure, there's got like the Mechanical Steed, the Engineer Lord, the Engineer Hero and stuff, but I imagine that that's going to come in a null DLC. It's really what I'm thinking about in Thrones of Decay. Now, Throne of Decay could literally just be something else, but it's kind of pointing towards that. And the idea is not a lot of units in this DLC, but rather character packs more than anything, and this is where we're going to get into the other stuff. Because I would literally call a DLC like this Summon the Elector Counts, and it would just introduce loads and loads of Elector Counts, because yes, while DLCs kind of focus on units and so on, it could just be done in that way. Just introduce more Elector Counts, give them a little mechanic here and there. We've got a lot missing. They don't even have to all be in their electoral state. They could be literally everywhere. But, you know, we're missing Boris, we're missing Marius, we're missing, well, pretty much everyone. Right now, the only playable Elector Counts are Karl Franz and technically Balthazar, because he's in Solon for some reason. Solon shouldn't really be a thing. Boris is in game, but he would probably be an FLC character for this. Just give him like a unique mechanic and a unique campaign, and obviously nobody's going to pay for Boris, so he'd have to be the free one. If the Ulrican units come in, then there you go. You've already got it linked up to Boris. Boris gets them, probably gets them a lot earlier. But yeah, bring in loads of legendary heroes too, you know, obviously Kurt Helborg, Ludwig Schwarzhelm, any others that you can think of, and just really add a lot of characters to the Empire. Last time Creative Assembly revealed some stats for the Empire, well, you know, just played factions in general, the Empire were first, so why not take advantage of that? Do a mega DLC, bring in loads of Empire characters, see that faction get played more and more, but with different start positions. We've got mechanics in play which can allow for a character to start somewhere else, but then also maybe go back to the Empire if needed. Obviously, Lokia Felhart has that mechanic, with their own respective locations of Karen Carr. But the idea is that, right? That way they're not all centralized, even though a lot of people would like them centralized, because easy confederation, I mean, Vlad's just going to kill them anyway, right? So it's just be giving them a reason for that. And should they be dead, you know, wiped out by any other factions and so on, you can literally bring them back with the Empire mechanic, so then you can confederate them anyway. I mean, I think that works out quite well. I mean, these are just some basic ideas I have for all three factions. I could probably do some more, well, in-depth ones in terms of videos and so on after I get some research done. As you can imagine, I'm a bit pressed for time because I'm recording this before I leave, and yeah, I'm kind of stressed because I don't like flying. I really do not like flying. So yeah, let me know what you guys think about this in the comments below. Do you think this works? I would love to see a lot of Empire characters. I want to see more Legendary Lords in general, and Legendary Heroes would be great. I just don't like the way that it's being handled right now. I want to see more. Because honestly, I'm starting to think that the 3 to 4 year mark that Creative Assembly gave out is going to be the end of Warhammer Fantasy from there. Which kind of scares me, but I think we've already covered that in another video anyway. I'm not sure when this one's going out. I think this is going on the Saturday. But yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Start a bit of a discussion, and I'll see you all again very, very soon. Have a good day.